Kevin Burton, and this is a quick demo of the latest version of Polar, version 1.12. And the biggest feature that I've added to this release, now, initially everything looks essentially normal, but there are a few other features that I wanted to highlight. The most obvious here is stats, and that's the biggest feature that's gone into this release. So we have a stats page, and we've had it for a while. The newest feature here is this reading progress. This is what's called a calendar chart. And essentially it's 52 weeks in a year. And it allows you to sort of keep progress on your daily goals and move forward on them. And what we're doing now is we're using your page marks to track your reading. And that data is stored in your repository, and then from there we're building the derived stats, and then we can build this reading progress. Each little dot is a day, and then you can mouse over it and see how many pages you've read that day. And in order to do this, we had to implement some new features in page marks, and I wanted to go over that. This view that you're seeing right now is going to be integrated throughout Polar and sort of part of the overall look and feel. One of the things we're planning on doing is gamifying the reading process. So we might even have a public leaderboard if you're sharing your data and you've opted into this process. But some of the ideas are to, you fix a commitment of a number of pages per day, and then we keep track of your streak, and you can have a running streak. There'll be two actual charts here, the reading progress here, and then we'll have a second one, which is the whether or not you've hit your streak or not. And so, you just set your streak to like 5 days, like say 5 or 10 pages, at least a day of reading, and then you can commit to that. So, most people will probably do, 20 or 30. And then you just say focus on that and you just hit your goals. The back end of this is going to change a little bit. This is at the top of Polar, this is the filter bar. And then that's going to go into every single page. It's not integrated just yet, but this way you can filter this page and then have reading progress per tag. So you could have a mathematics tag and you can have your reading progress just for that. Now, in order to implement this, we had to change some things in page marks, and I wanted to go over that. So there's some new features there. So let me find a specific document. So the Bitcoin white paper is the one I always use for sort of playing around with. But essentially, what we can do now, I'm going to move this down just a little bit, is we can expand the sidebar. So we can create, I think the last couple of releases this sort of went in, but if you right click and then do create page mark to point, it'll create a page mark across multiple pages. And that was really helpful because if you wanted to come into Polar and then you wanted to previously import a book, you could create a page mark over, say, 50 pages and then over that range, and then you could commit that to your repository. But the problem is that now that would count against your reading, and it would look like, let's say there's a 300-page book, you've already read 100 pages of it, and you created a page mark over the first 100 pages. The reading would calculate it as you've read 100 pages in that day. So that's kind of frustrating. So in this release, we've added this new feature called page mark modes. So you can go to page mark mode, and it just right click on the page mark context menu. And then we have a number of modes here. Oops, I kind of messed that up. Let me just delete this page mark, and then I'll do this again. So you can actually then go into here and then set the page mark mode to previously read. And then what that will do is it actually changes the color slightly, but it also changes the mode in the page mark. And then when it's previously read, we don't calculate the reading progress against that. So you can then keep you can then properly keep track of your reading without necessarily having to have incorrect counts. We also support some other modes here, including ignored, table of contents, appendix, and references. So ignored is just a catch-all, like if there's a section of the text that you're kind of not interested in. I find this happens in technical documents where I just will know a specific topic, right? So let's say I'm reviewing mathematics and there's something on set theory or something, and you know that aspect of set theory, so that whole chapter you don't need to read. So you can create a page mark for it and just ignore it, and it will then become gray. Let me create that. And so ignored. So that becomes gray, and then that means that you're not sort of interested in that part of the book. That's really nice because when you've marked it as ignored, you haven't committed to reading. You haven't said that you've read that. Maybe maybe you change and you want to come back to it at the future point in time. And then we support two other types of modes: table of contents, appendix, and then references. So some documents actually do have proper table of contents structure in them. So one of the reasons I did this was if there's a textbook or something and they don't have table of contents, you can create a table of contents page mark over the 5 pages, and then we're going to add a feature that you can jump to it in the future, but we don't have that implemented just yet. And this way you can just jump to the table of contents or the appendix really easily and sort of create your own quick outline. And then none of that actually is impacted on the stats. So as you're updating those page marks, since they're either ignored or previously read, they don't count towards your page mark numbers for that day. And then there's one other feature, actually two, that I wanted to highlight here. Let's go back to that Bitcoin paper. So one of them is batches. So now if you create page marks, across multiple pages, let's go down to this third page, and then you create page mark to point. Now what we do is we actually call a batch, because the page marks are actually individual objects. It's a long story, but they're actually individual objects in the model. And then so this way, since they were created as one sort of atomic unit, you can delete them also as one atomic unit. And so all the operations, including mode and delete, operate on the batches now. So if you create 50 page marks, you can also delete them as one chunk. If you need to split them up, you just create 2 batches or just do two units, and that will work. And that way you can create different types of modes and so forth. And then another feature that was requested was the ability to really quickly resume a document to where you left off. So let's say we've been reading the Bitcoin paper and we want to come back to it. So let's just close that. Let's say it's a week later and we want to pick up where we left off. Well, in the past, you'd have to manually find your position. Now you can just double click on the header bar, and it will find. Actually, let me do this again because it got a little confusing here. So it's too many page marks. Okay, so gonna go back into it. Okay, so we have an empty document. So let's just say we want to create a page mark to this point. So now we have, roughly 3 pages. But if we exit and come back in, it's not going to necessarily be at that point. So what this new version does is if you double click on the header bar, it'll resume your position for you. And then it'll just jump to that point in the progress, and you can actually just resume where you've left off. And I would like to sort of do it automatically, or at least have a prompt for it or something, but there's like a delay in the loading of the document, so it's going to take a while. I got to figure out the best way to implement this. But that is the sort of highlight of what went into this new release and the features that have been implemented. And in this release, another thing I changed was I removed a lot of sort of the prompts in the user interface. You don't see there used to be a message box up here at the top. I removed that, and I removed a lot of the prompts. So Polar is kind of silent now. And one of the things I'm trying to do with Polar is I'm trying to keep the community involved. And what I found is that adding events at certain various times will encourage people to leave reviews and download the Chrome extension and various other things. And so I'm going to be adding those back in. And those are going to be a little bit better implemented this time. So, for example, in the past, there was kind of a review thing that just would pop up at random points in time. I think it was usually sometimes the second time you'd load Polar. And the problem is that sometimes people would give reviews before they actually used Polar. So what I'm going to do in the next release is I'm going to sort of tie these events in at various lifecycle events. So we're not going to prompt for you to give feedback on Polar until you've hit at least a week and at least save 5 documents or something like that. So that way we know the user is gotten some familiarity with it. And then there's some other things that I want to implement. So, like if you're using AnkiSync, I'd like you to encourage you to review the AnkiSync plugin and to see if it's working for you. That's important. The Chrome extension, same thing. The reviews are really important, and it's really just a simple, one click for the users. But it's sort of like when you're trying to get a community, you kind of need to sort of corral them in the right direction to sort of steer their behavior. And it's just a simple, right when the right time, and you can get a dramatic improvement, sort of in community behavior. And that is one of the core things about Polar that I'm trying to really encourage, is that in the background, I want Polar users to not just be isolated, but actively collaborating together, and doing it, in a privacy conscious way. But, the things like the flashcards and the annotations and the tags are all really valuable to other Polar members. So what I'm trying to get it is so that way, we can encourage the ratings, and the ratings will encourage other users to find Polar. And then, the users' tags, when they're sharing and working with their repository, those can be used by other Polar users. And, the annotations and the highlights are actually also is very valuable too. So and then I think I mentioned before about the gamification of actually encouraging people to read and having leaderboards. That stuff actually is really amazing, and I'm really excited to get that. I think we're just about getting to the point now where I can start turning on those features. And the general philosophy has always been that it doesn't make sense to do these things without the tool. And so I needed to build a tool before I could sort of enable the community features. People don't go around just like highlighting documents without some benefit. So the core of Polar was designed to be a tool that people could use to start annotating their own documents, and then that would be a bootstrap around a way for the community to start doing it together, because we need a way to sort of get the community to start actively collaborating. So that's where we are in this release. I think the next release is probably going to be another week. I usually try to do it a week at a time, and I think it's probably going to focus on onboarding and then making it easier for users to get into Polar. So adding documents, turning on Cloud Sync, explaining the user interface. I still think we are getting a lot of users to, where they're confused and they sort of don't know what to do on the sort of initial splash of Polar. And so that's where we are. If you are a really big Polar fan, I would appreciate a couple things. If you're a Zotero user, if you could write up sort of the key features that you need from Zotero, we've had a bunch of users asking for those features. If you could write up some of those, that would be great. If you could review Polar positively on the Chrome extension and the Anki add-on, that would be great. And then, of course, please donate to Polar. We're still, really in the hole, in the negatives on Polar. We've managed to get about $300 worth of donations. It's really harsh. That's really low. So we got to get the donations up. I think probably what I'm going to do as part of the on-ramping is to, actually, really try to, encourage users to donate in the user interface. So that way it's just more part of the normal flow. So, please, we really appreciate all your feedback. Feedback is really helpful. And then I think I mentioned the feedback is actually right here in the user interface. So if you like Polar, please give us feedback. The feedback is like insanely valuable. Like I can't literally. It really helps us prioritize the features. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.